All right, guys, so today we are going to be talking about my results using the Iron Neck for 11 weeks straight. And I have to say, I was actually very surprised by the results. So we're going to obviously go over all that here. It is not what I think anybody would have expected, given my beliefs on strength and size. All right, so just a little bit of background. I have been doing direct neck training since 2017. As I mentioned in that last video, obviously I do not have a very large neck, but it is about an inch bigger than when I started. So I got that first inch pretty much within the first year or so, and then it's more or less maintained since then, and it had gone up from about 15 and a quarter at the Adam's apple up to 16 and a quarter, and so that was kind of a baseline at 190 pounds. Over the years, I had gone up to 3 times per week neck training. I had included not just the extensions and the flexions, but also going to the side and using bands versus weights. And to be honest, I never really saw much beyond that initial year, and so I decided, you know what? I've had a few kinks over the years where, probably every couple of months I would like kink my neck, and I've seen Joe Rogan and some other people talk about this iron neck for a long time. And I'm at a place where I kind of like to experiment with different things. So I said, sure, let's try it out. Let's see. So I wanted to keep my traditional neck training 1 time per week. And then I was planning on adding 5 10-minute sessions of iron neck per week. So basically just 10 minutes straight, keeping it on, doing various angles. So because you're basically going all the way around, you can kind of just almost do this continuous set. Now in reality, with how busy my schedule was, that was not super practical. So I actually ended up doing 3 10-minute sessions per week. So 3 10-minute sessions with the iron neck per week on top of my traditional neck training. And when you think about the amount of time that is, it's quite a lot, because as I said, I was doing my regular strength training session, which was about 30 minutes by the time that I was doing all my warm-ups, because it's something that I don't just want to go into something. Not that I'm training super heavy, but with something like neck, I don't just want to jump right into it. I want to have some warm-ups. The whole thing was probably taking about half an hour of time. But if you actually break that down, how much of that time is actually working, and I would take 2 minutes of rest between sets. So the actual amount of time, it was 3 sets of flexions, 3 sets of extensions, and then I do another cable extension. So basically you're looking at like 7 to 10 minutes of actual work. Whereas now I'm adding 3 10-minute sessions where I'm working the whole time. Again, I'm turning, I'm rotating, I'm doing protractions and retractions. And so there's just constant time. So the actual amount of time worked is incredible. You think about a standard workout where you could be doing 20 sets, and that might take you an hour and a half. But again, you're maybe only actually working for 20 minutes. So the actual amount of time working was a lot during that period. Now, if you've seen some of my other videos on neck training, you will have heard me say that even though I didn't gain that much size beyond the first year, I continued to gain strength. And that was very surprising, a little odd to me, because I am somebody who believes there is a very strong correlation between strength and size. If I look at almost any of my other muscle groups, if they were not gaining strength in, real good movements over time, I really wasn't getting bigger. And conversely, anytime that I had gotten significantly bigger, I can look at the exercise I was doing and I made progress. So it was kind of strange that I was making these strength gains without really any notable size gains. And I thought, okay, could it have been technique? You're getting used to it. But we're talking about pretty simple movements here, right? This is not like a complex movement or a deadlift where you're changing from sumo to conventional or vice versa. This is just a neck flexion and neck extension. So I was always kind of surprised by that. But I have to say, something similar happened here, and not just with iron neck, not just with my strength on iron neck, which I would expect to get better, again, neurological adaptations and all this. What I found was actually really incredible, and I want to kind of detail specifically here. So for these extensions and flexions, I would usually do somewhere between 10 and 20 reps. Now, my flexions got notably stronger by a couple of reps over this period, but I specifically want to mention the extensions because generally I was stalled out for that first set, and I would do it where the weight was directly in front of me, not coming down from the sides. And I was doing my first set at about 25 to 26 reps, and over months and months and months, I had slowly gotten that up to 30 reps on my first set. And I'm talking like I would do 30, the next week I would do 30 again, next week I would do 30. Just like that's just where I've been. And I'm like, okay, I'm just kind of maintaining that. Within the first week of doing this much iron neck, I got up to 35, and then I got to 36, and then I got to 37, and then I got to 38. Imagine adding that many reps to like a bench press or anything else that you've been doing week after week after week, and then this just astronomical increase in strength. Like I was literally laughing when I was doing it. I was like, this is crazy how much stronger this got. And so I was really intrigued by that. And honestly, I wanted to just keep doing it. If initially I was thinking about just doing a 1 month experiment, and I just thought, a month is not enough time. Even if I am going to make great gains, I'm not going to see that in 1 month. So that's why I extended it to almost 3 months. So I was really amazed by the strength gains. Again, not just with the iron neck movements, but the neck movements that I was doing prior. I found that very interesting. However, I will also note what was also interesting was similar to before where I made all this strength gain and then didn't really see the same size. That again happened. So after 11 weeks, I measured at the Adam's apple and my size was identical. I measured down here, which is a harder place to measure consistently because where you bring it can change it by quite a bit. You kind of involve the traps a little bit, but that was identical as well. Right at the top, if I get right under my mandible, that seemed to go up by somewhere between 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. And again, I verified that with numerous measurements. Now, that's not nothing. I mean, if you've been stalled out for a long time and you gain 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch somewhere, that's great. I will also say though, that I had gone up about 2 to 3 pounds in my average weekly weight. And that alone can be significant. I mean, I remember Charles Poliquin back in the day would say that for about 1 inch on your arms, you need about 15 pounds of weight gain. Now, obviously that's gonna depend on your height and all these other factors, but I've noticed that that's kind of generally true. And so if you think about that, 3 pounds, you're talking about 1/5 of that, 1/5 of an inch. Again, that we're talking about arms, but you could see that that could correlate with other body parts. And so it is really hard to say if anything changed. Again, 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch over 11 weeks, gaining 3 pounds of body weight. It clearly wasn't some hugely dramatic increase, if there was any increase at all. I'd have to really go back to my previous weight 3 pounds lower and remeasure and see if that carried over. So maybe if I did it for a year or 2 years, there would be a 1/4 of an inch or a steady 3/8 of an inch or something like that. But again, the strength gains were much more dramatic than the size gains. Somebody had commented in my last video saying, well, it could just be that, at like, let's say 180 pounds, you're just not going to have this huge neck. And I really agree with that. I would agree with that for any body part. I've seen other coaches in the years talk about, hey, you're not going to have 20-inch arms at 165 pounds, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, you're going to have limits depending on your weight and your general size. And so if you think about it like arms, as we said, you're not going to have these gigantic arms if you're on stage at 150 pounds. You might have impressive arms depending on the insertions and whatnot, but the actual measurement is just not going to be that huge. And similarly, at 6'1", 180 pounds, I'm not going to have this huge neck, nor do I desire this huge neck. It's just kind of something I've been doing over the years. And previously, I did have quite a thinner neck. And so I wouldn't expect somebody to have this giant neck. Again, unless you see, like one of my patients recently compete in jiu-jitsu, and they've been doing it for 10 years. I mean, that you're constantly doing it hours and hours and hours every week. It's a little bit different. And even then, if you look at some of the top jiu-jitsu guys, they might have bigger necks, but it's not like they're just having these freaky, weird necks, So obviously there's a lot of it's genetic. There's a lot that's involved there. But the point being that at a given weight, you're gonna be somewhat limited with how big certain measurements can be. So my conclusion from the experiment is that I liked it. I did like the iron neck. I like that there needed to be less warm up in my experience. So basically, like I said before, if I'm doing my regular neck extensions and flexions, I'm warming up for probably a good 10 minutes beforehand. I know some people said, oh, neck doesn't take that long. You just kind of do it. Maybe depending on the weight and the way you're doing it. But to me, if you're loading up 50 pounds onto your neck, that's something I would want to be very warmed up for. What I found is that cable extensions and flexions do not need as much compared to loading the weight, meaning they don't need as much warm up. And iron neck, which I also do on a cable, did not need as much warm up. And so probably what I will do going forward is just maybe 1 session of iron neck per week and maybe a couple sets of extensions and flexions. Because honestly, I just don't feel like dedicating after, 7 or 8 years now, I don't feel like dedicating 40 minutes or so just to neck training every week. It's just, at this point, it kind of is what it is. And if I can do 10 minutes of the iron neck and 10 minutes of extensions and flexions after a workout where I'm kind of already warmed up, I think that's plenty. I'm actually going to do a 3-month trial of just iron neck twice a week for 8 to 10 minutes and see if that maintains it. Because honestly, it's just frankly easier to do. And so if that maintains it at exactly the same size, then that's just what I'm gonna do. I think that would be fine. I have some small concerns over maybe the health of doing weighted extension and flexions for decades on end. I'm not totally sure about that, but I would have potentially some concerns. Whereas with the iron neck, I would have less concerns. So again, I'm gonna try that for 3 months, see If I lose a little size, maybe I'll go back to 1-in-1 of the different sessions, but if not, I'll probably just stick with the iron neck. As far as whether or not it's worth it for somebody, it's pretty expensive. I mean, you're talking close to $300, I think, just for like the basic one. Maybe it was a little bit under that. And then if you get the whole prime package, whatever they have there, you're talking $500. I don't know. I mean, maybe if there's like an orthopedic reason that you would benefit from it. Otherwise, I think that you probably could be fine with just some light extensions and flexions once or twice a week. It just really depends on your price point. For some people, that is nothing at all. For other people, that's really expensive. I didn't mind buying it. I was fine with it personally, but for a lot of people watching this are teenagers or in your early 20s, might not be something that is worth it for you. And the last thing I'll say regarding the kinks that I mentioned earlier, it's not like it happens all the time. If you actually think of the number of neck sets I've done over the years, the percentage of times that it leads to a kink is not that high. However, I've had some pretty significant ones. I mean, obviously with my career, I am leaning over a lot, doing these kind of like micro procedures. And so for me to have a significantly kinked neck, sometimes for days at a time, that's a problem. I kinked my neck once with the iron neck in that 11 weeks. But again, if you think about the actual amount of time I'm doing it, it's a very low percentage versus the weighted neck extensions and flexions. It's kind of one of those things that people say, if you do powerlifting long enough, you're going to get injured. If you do jujitsu long enough, you're going to get injured. I think if you're training your neck for 10 plus years, you're probably going to get the occasional little kink, but obviously if I can minimize that, I prefer it. And again, as I said before, cables seem a lot smoother. So just kind of like a word of caution there for anybody who's going to try to go heavier on it. So that's it, guys. That is my most recent experiment. I just figured I'd let you know how it went, give you an update there. If there's anything else that you're curious about me experimenting with, whether it's a certain routine or, we did that Ninja Creamy recipe and all that other stuff, let me know. At this stage in the game, I'm interested to try new things to kind of keep it fun and interesting. And this was, I thought, a fun experiment that actually did come with some results. And so that is a little bit telling to me about frequency and whatnot with neck training specifically. Thought it was interesting. Maybe you guys did as well. That is it for this video. Comment down below on what you'd like to see. Subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time.